Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, The Pathway to Digital Transformation in Government, sponsored by Juniper Networks on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Pam Dyson, the Chief Information Officer at the Securities and Exchange Commission, Tim Bengen, the IT Development Director for the Navy Reserve Forces Command, and Dave Shive, the Chief Information Officer for the General Services Administration. Now, before break, Pam was just talking about the business process re-engineering piece. Dave, you wanted to jump in, so lead us off. Give us a little more about BPR and how it relates to what you guys are doing at GSA.
Right. So we established that BPR is a critical component of modern digital design. As CIO, I have the benefit of providing tools and capabilities for the businesses of GSA so it can effectively operate. GSA also is a service provider out to the federal community by providing tools and process for them. You know, internal to GSA, we can act like a test bed to vet our findings, and we've seen some really great outcomes in doing that. Our employees, the cost of our stack of technology has gone down by over 17% over the last 5 years, but our employees say the technology is working more effectively and more useful. And then we've been able to pivot that and turn that out to our government customers when we build data.gov or usa.gov or login.gov. All of these customer service, user experience focused design standards are pushed out to the citizens that we serve, not just the customers that we do. I'll give you an example. We worked with the Department of Education to stand up College Scorecard. And it's a tool that allows parents and their students who are looking and assessing colleges to assess colleges on a set criteria. We built a small tool that allowed them to analyze the data and make good choices. But we didn't stop there. We also exposed an API out so that others in the education community and the student community could access the data the way they wanted to and make decisions based on that data. So it's a learning that we had internal that we exposed out to our external customers.
I'm more impressed by the 17% reduction in cost of the stack. Does that mean the O&M DME discussion? We don't necessarily have to go down that path, but that's a big piece of digital transformation. Have you dropped your operations and maintenance, or is 17% less is basically by the person, by the seat, if you will?
No, that's total spend, O&M and DM&E, and it's been a part of our transformation play. We've been allowed to reinvest that back into additional transformations into the organization. Really strong leadership by the leads of GSA to allow us to do that.
It's excellent news. I mean, I think everyone's under pressure to do more with less, so to speak. Right. And speaking of that, that takes down the path to cloud and the next step of cloud, if you will, software-defined networking. Tim, you mentioned that you guys in the Navy Reserves are looking at cloud. You have a pilot with Office 365. Give me a sense, where does cloud play in your big transformation discussion?
Sure. So cloud plays a big role in our future. Right now we're in IT, legacy IT infrastructure environments, and we pay quite a bit for that hosting services plus any infrastructure that we have on site, which is very minimal right now because we use enterprise hosting services. But the cloud, we have Office 365. We're looking at going to Amazon Web Services, which we already have some environments stood up inside of Amazon Web Services. Our Navy Reserve public website is hosted there right now. So if you go and search for Navy Reserve and you go to our website for publicly available information, it's in the Amazon Web Services GovCloud. The Microsoft Azure platform, we're conducting a pilot with the Navy to host some platform as a service there in the Azure environment. And that will be what we call a Reserve Enterprise Application Locker, which is a collection of .NET apps. As I was mentioning earlier, we provide a mobile app for our reservists to log in and do transactional things on our side. So we're going to host that in Azure, whether instead of an enterprise data center. It really reduces the cost of our hosting, and security goes up because we're inside of the Microsoft enclave. We don't have to worry about doing all of the own security ourselves, the patches, that kind of thing. Where we're looking forward to moving into the cloud, and it really increases the capabilities. I mean, we get a lot more benefit from moving to the cloud because a lot of the services are available that we just don't have access to right now.
You mentioned the application locker. It's a fascinating idea because, as you mentioned, as the reservists need to do something, eventually they won't have to just come into the building, but they can do it from wherever is convenient, and everything's going to happen on the back end, and that's why it's if you will, the application locker, because that's where all the transactions are happening. Do I have that?
That's correct.
All right. And is there a timing on that? Do you expect that to be up and running, or at least the initial?
We would like the initial by the end of this calendar year, and right now the thing we're waiting on is contracts. So we got to get a contract in place so we can consume Azure services, and that's what's being worked right now. We expect that to be in place and our development environment to be stood up and tested prior to the end of this year.
All right, well, something to look out for. We could talk contracting, but we'll move over to Pam for a second. Cloud has been a big piece of your modernization effort for quite a while. I remember your predecessor, Tom Bayer, talking about it. Where are you guys now with the cloud infrastructure?
So we've developed a cloud strategy, and it absolutely is on the critical path for the way that the SEC will meet mission, quite honestly, going forward. So we've done some things in the cloud in the past. We moved Edgar. You mentioned Edgar. Our Edgar public search is in the cloud, so you can search for public filings in the cloud as we do it today. We've also moved a lot of our incident management into the cloud. A lot of our self-service from a human capital standpoint, portals and platforms will also be moved to the cloud. But I think the biggest bang for the SEC will be moving our analytics program to the cloud and being able to leverage the robustness of the cloud, the scalability of the cloud to run analytics on these huge data sets that are coming into the organization. So we're definitely on the path to the cloud. As you know, in some of my other panels I've been here, we talked about we implemented an enterprise data warehouse a few years ago. We have seen that capability grow by leaps and bounds. We're also looking at extending or augmenting that on-prem solution into the cloud again, so that we can have more flexibility with what we do with data there. So, we are moving out on our cloud strategy, and everything that we do going forward from a modernization effort will take the cloud into account.
And that was actually my follow-up question,
Yeah.
because as you heard Tim describe, for instance, as a Navy reservist needs to look at their schedule or do something with HR related, they can do that from anywhere, hopefully in time.
Right.
Are you, the cloud's playing that role as well to the
cloud
access?
will play that role to access to all human capital resources, everything from time and attendance to retirement plans to calendars. So, the chief human capital officer there and I are working hand in glove together to build these solutions. But yeah, we're going to be building those out in the cloud so that they're readily available anytime on any device for our users at the SEC.
And I know, Dave, you guys have, because of you being out in front with the cloud, things like telework from GSA is such a big deal, hoteling, all of that, I imagine, is in some kind of, if it's not, it will be in some kind of cloud platform. So as you're driving, well, not when you're driving, but before you leave your house to drive in, maybe you can reserve your desk. Is that part of that modernization effort? The cloud plays that role?
It is. So yeah, it's a key part of it. We take cloud first very seriously. We're at the point now where we have to ask ourselves what's not in the cloud. In GSA, our core financial system at the infrastructure sits in the cloud. Our mail and collaboration is in the cloud. Our help desks are in the cloud. Our back office workflows in the cloud. It just goes on. Even small things like mobile device management and stuff like that is all in the cloud now. And it does help. I can check into my desk, before I leave the house, and when I get there, nobody's sitting in there, which is fantastic. But there's real-world examples of the ability that meshing together of mobility and cloud-enabled technology allows us to do some things that were unheard of. I'll give you a perfect example. When Hurricane Sandy roared ashore in New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut, the place was devastated. Very little power, almost no networking, but we were obligated to provide service to the federal agencies that we support, and we're also obligated to provide service to the citizens that we support in the region. So we had acquisition professionals who were buying chainsaws and generators for federal facilities from their cell phone, from the nearest Pep Boys that had a little bit of power and a little bit of network, or find the closest cell tower all they had to do is find any kind of network, and they could do the acquisitions they needed to help first responding agencies, or find out through our geospatial program where the federal buildings in that domain were, so they could send people out to go check on the buildings and the status of the buildings. It's a great example, and there's 1,000 examples just like that. When you give those tools to people and blow out the walls of a GSA building and say you can do your work from anywhere at any time on any device, it's a game changer.
And the next step for you guys then, since you have so much in the cloud, I mean, are you starting to look at some of the if you will, I'll call them emerging technologies like software-defined networking to take the cloud to the next level?
Sure. You know, the next step on that is rather than just software-defined networking, we're using software-defined anything and everything. You know, our developers who are part of our DevSecOps teams look at security in the cloud, networks in the cloud, infrastructure, the entire stack of infrastructure in the cloud, the application in the cloud, databases in the cloud. And that allows us to spend our hard time developing tools and software that are going to meet the business need and be entirely business focused, rather than on patching servers and, you know, checking on the health of networks and stuff like that. So
I think it's interesting when you talk about the entire stack on in the cloud or on as a software-based event, if you will. It must change your job a little bit too? Then you go from the CIO who's worried about the buttons and the blinking lights,
right,
a little bit to the CIO who's worried about the tools.
So I said to my infrastructure director 2.5 years ago that our joined job was to work him out of a job. And I was somewhat kidding when I said that, because he'll always have a job, just the fundamental nature of his job changes. You know, hardware is code now, and that's where we're headed. So he is an infrastructure guy dealing with spinning drive and blinking lights, has had to learn how to operate in a code-defined world. But that's where we're headed, and ignoring that's just going to make us live that legacy world that we're trying to get out of.
Pam, are you also the SEC heading down that path from a software-defined piece, as Dave described it?
Absolutely. We are just starting to foray into that space. We're mostly doing it in our development environments, but we're certainly looking at you know, software-defined networking. But for us, again, it's more around the provisioning and the work that we're doing as a part of the development life cycle at this point. We have not moved to, you know, SDN for our production environments yet, but we're on our way. So we're just starting in that space.
Now, Tim, let me turn to you, because one of the things that the Navy has some, if you will, tighter security controls that we have to worry about. But a piece of this move to the cloud, a piece of this eventual software-defined networking is the automation piece, and the ability for you to look at your schedule and say, well, we're going to have 50 reservists come in instead of 30, so do we need more network space, or it's a busy day because everyone's got to sign up for something or other. Are you guys automatically being able to say, okay, how can we kind of use the cloud to address the increase in use?
Yes, we're definitely looking at that. We're planning for that. As soon as we can leverage these services, we want to automate. We know when drill weekends are. We know when we're going to have reservists come in and need to do some work, and we can even gauge that. It's not only on the weekend, it's on the few days prior to the weekend. So we can scale our services prior to and during that drill weekend, so that way, and we can do it automatically, so we don't have to be sitting anywhere pushing buttons, you know, to have that happen. And we can build that algorithm into the system so that the system knows when our people need to use our services, so we can scale up, scale back down. How do we pay for that in the DoD under contracts? We're still working through that. How do you pay for a service you don't know how much it's going to cost up front? It's still a tricky piece of paperwork that we're working through, but it's going to really open the door for us. And from where I sit, the discussion you were having earlier, I don't like having to worry about hardware anymore. That's one thing that we don't have to worry about. Hardware was always our biggest limitation of any of our technologies we wanted to use. And another automation piece that we could do is we have a hard time sometimes matching our sailors, and I don't want to speak out of my department, but from where I see, sometimes we have a hard time matching sailors to job opportunities. Sometimes they just don't know about them, so we can automate matching sailors up to job opportunities, so that way they can be more active if they choose to be, and they can know when something available is near them, so that they can go and do a drill.
It's interesting you talk about not wanting to own the hardware. Is that something that is not just happening with the reserves, but do you see that with other colleagues in the Navy trying to get out of that owning, or is your focus just so much on the reserves?
There are, and we're actually meeting with them tomorrow. So they're going down the same road we are. They're moving to the cloud very rapidly, maybe even more so than we are. We've had our foot in the door for quite some time because we are a smaller force, so we have a little bit more flexibility there than the bigger Navy does. But they're absolutely looking at the same things, and they're the Navy Cloud First policy came out several months ago, so everybody's really clamoring to get on board with that. And once they start to see the reduction in cost that this brings about, and the responsibility of the hardware going away, that's the biggest piece, and the security going up, and your responsibility to maintain, as Dave was mentioning, the patches of those servers, the uptime of those servers. We transfer that to whoever cloud provider we end up going with. Saves us a lot.
Dave, you're shaking your head a little bit here. Talk a little bit about the automation piece and how that's benefiting GSA.
Yeah, so Pam mentioned this earlier. The rapid pace of change of technology demands that we automate stuff. We're also finding that the pace of change in our businesses is increasing, and so we need to stay as fast as that and be able to work as effectively as that. We also find that those who would choose to do harm to the federal government are many, and that we need to automate things like our cybersecurity presentation that we present out to the world. We can't just continue to hire more people and build more firewalls and stuff. So we've built automated scripts and automated capabilities to be able to protect our borders much faster than a human ever could. We've bought into automation because of the rapid pace of change in technology. We need to deliver faster and faster, and it's faster. We can't just grow our teams indefinitely, so we've had to be smart about that. We do things like we use containers to build stuff, so we can build prepackaged capabilities to serve business and push them out very, very quickly in discrete ways. So you're not having to build infrastructure and build security and build cyber into that. They're pre-built containers that you're just putting the business layer on top of that. That's also going to help us with how we manage security in the future. Right now, you have infrastructure that presents as a target to people who would choose to do harm to the government. If that thing disappears and it only turns on when a workload is actually necessary, that makes it much harder to hack and break and cause harm to. If it's only on for the 3 minutes that workload's necessary, then that helps us out immeasurably.
All right, interesting. Now, security has come up a bunch of times, so we're going to take a break. When we come back, I think we're going to talk about security. You're listening to the panel discussion, The Pathway to Digital Transformation in Government, sponsored by Juniper Networks on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.